many of you brought a Bible with you? Okay. One way or another, electronic, paper, I don't really care. We're going to look at two particular chapters in the book of Exodus today. And we're going to be going back and forth between these two chapters because there's a lot of correlation and there's a lot of comparison and there's a big, big lesson to be learned in these two chapters. Okay? So, first, I'm going to pray. Because I don't know about you guys, but there are times when God asks me to do things that are not easy. And at those times, I really need His strength. So, if you'll just bear with me for a minute. Father, I praise you, I love you, and I thank you for your presence in my life, and I ask you now to just fill my mouth with your words, fill my mind with your thoughts, and fill my heart with your love, that I may deliver your word in a way that is receptive, a way that is receivable, a way that is acceptable to you, and a way that will make a change. Father, your word is powerful. It cuts right to the point, and it can separate our thoughts from our intents of our heart. It exposes us to you, and it exposes us to ourselves. So, Father, I ask that you would go before, make the pathway straight and smooth, and deliver your word to your people. And I pray this in the powerful name of Jesus. Amen. Amen. I want to start in Exodus chapter 24. We're going to read the whole chapter because all the correlations and all the parts come from this whole chapter. I'm reading from the NIV, so your scriptures might be a little bit different. I'm going to take this off here because it's easier. Then the Lord said to Moses, "Come up to the Lord, you and Aaron, Nadab and Abihu, and 70 elders of Israel. You are to worship at a distance, but Moses alone is to approach the Lord. The others must not come near, and the people may not come up with him." When Moses went and told the people all the Lord's words and laws, they responded with one voice, "Everything the Lord has said, we will do." Moses then wrote down everything the Lord had said. He got up early the next morning and he built an altar at the foot of the mountain and set up 12 stone pillars representing the 12 tribes of Israel. Then he sent young Israelite men, and they offered burnt offerings and sacrificed young bulls as fellowship offerings to the Lord. Moses took half the blood and put it in bowls, and the other half he sprinkled on the altar. Then he took the book of the covenant and he read it to the people. They responded, "We will do everything the Lord has said. We will obey." Moses then took the blood, sprinkled it on the people, and said, "This is the blood of my covenant that the Lord has made with you in accordance with all these words." Moses and Aaron, Nadab and Abihu, and the 70 elders of Israel went up and saw the Lord God of Israel. Under his feet was something like pavement made from sapphire, clear as the sky itself. But God did not raise his hand against the leaders of the Israelites. They saw God, and they ate and drank. The Lord said to Moses, "Come up to me in the mountain and stay here, and I will give you the tablets of stone with the with the law and commandments I have written for their instruction." Then Moses set out with Joshua, his aide, and Moses went up to the mountain of God. He said to the elders, "Wait here until we come back to you. Aaron and Hur are with you, and anyone involved in a dispute can go to them." When Moses went up to the mountain, the cloud covered it, and the glory of the Lord settled on Mount Sinai. For 6 days the cloud covered the mountain, and on the 7th day the Lord called to Moses from within the cloud. To the Israelites, the glory of the Lord looked like a consuming fire on top of the mountain. Then Moses entered the cloud as he went on up the mountain, and he stayed on the mountain 40 days and 40 nights. Now, chapter 25 through to chapter 31 is all about those 40 days. Okay? Everything God and Moses were doing in those 40 days, that's what you'll find in those chapters. So jump to chapter 32, and we're going to read the whole chapter. And you're going to see some things, hopefully, they'll pop right off the page at you, and you'll go, wait a minute. So, verse 1 of chapter 32. When the people saw Moses was so long in coming down from the mountain, they gathered around Aaron and said, "Come, make us gods who will go before us. As for this fellow Moses, who brought us up out of Egypt, we don't know what has happened to him." Aaron answered, "Take off the gold earrings that your wives, your sons, and your daughters are wearing, and bring them to me." So all the people took off their earrings and brought them to Aaron. He took what they handed him and made it into an idol, cast in the shape of a calf, fashioning it with a tool. Then they said, "These are your gods, O Israel, who brought you up out of Egypt." When Aaron saw this, he built an altar in front of the calf and announced, "Tomorrow there will be a festival to the Lord." So the next day, the people rose early and sacrificed burnt offerings and presented fellowship offerings. Afterward, they sat down to eat and drink and got up to indulge in revelry. Then the Lord said to Moses, "Go down, because your people, whom you brought up out of Egypt, have become corrupt. They have been quick to turn away from what I commanded them, and have made themselves an idol cast in the shape of a calf. They have bowed down to it and sacrificed to it, and have said, 'These are your gods, O Israel, who brought you up out of Egypt.' I have seen these people," the Lord said to Moses, "and they are a stiff-necked people. Now leave me alone, so that my anger may burn against them, that I may destroy them. Then I will make you into a great nation." But Moses sought the favor of the Lord God. He said, "O Lord, why should your anger burn against your people, whom you brought up out of Egypt with great power and a mighty hand? Why should the Egyptians say it was with evil intent that he brought them out, to kill them in the mountains and to wipe them off the face of the earth? Turn from your fierce anger, relent, and do not bring disaster on your people. Remember your servant Abraham, Isaac, and Israel," which is just another name for Joseph. "Abraham, Isaac, and Israel, to whom you swore by your own self, I will make your descendants as numerous as the stars in the sky, and I will give your descendants all this land. I promise them, and it will be their inheritance forever." Then the Lord relented, and he did not bring on his people the disaster he had threatened. Moses turned and went down the mountain with the 2 tablets of the testimony in his hands. They were inscribed on both sides, front and back. The tablets were the work of God. The writing was the writing of God engraved on the tablets. When Joshua heard the noise of the people shouting, he said to Moses, "There's the sound of war in the camp." And Moses replied, "It's not the sound of victory. It's not the sound of defeat. It's the sound of singing that I hear." When Moses approached the camp, he saw the calf and the dancing, and his anger burned, and he threw the tablets out of his hands, breaking them to pieces at the foot of the mountain. And he took the calf that they made, and he burned it in the fire. Then he ground it into a powder, scattered it on the water, and made the Israelites drink it. He said to Aaron, "What did these people do to you that you led them into such great sin?" And this is Aaron's reply. "Do not be angry, my Lord. You know how prone these people are to evil. They said to me, 'Make us gods who will go before us.' As for this fellow Moses who brought us up out of Egypt, we don't know what has happened to him. So I told them, whoever has any gold jewelry, take it off. Then they gave me the gold, and I threw it in the fire, and out came this calf." Moses saw that the people were running wild, and that Aaron had let them get out of control, and so became a laughingstock to all their enemies. So he stood at the entrance of the camp, and he said, "Whoever is for the Lord, come to me." And all the Levites rallied to him. And then he said to them, "This is what the Lord, the God of Israel, says. Each man strap on a sword to his side. Go back and forth through the camp from one end to the other, each killing his brother, his friend, and his neighbor." And the Levites did as Moses commanded, and that day about 3,000 people died. Then Moses said, "You have been set apart to the Lord today, for you were against your own sons and brothers, and he has blessed you this day." The next day Moses said to the people, "You have committed a great sin. But now I will go up before the Lord. Perhaps I can make atonement for your sin." So Moses went back before the Lord, and he said, "Oh, what a great sin these people have committed. They have made themselves gods of gold. But now please forgive their sin. But if not, then blot me out of your book you have written." And the Lord replied to Moses, "Whoever has sinned against me I will blot out of my book. Now go, lead the people to the place I spoke of, and my angel will go before you. However, when the time comes for me to punish, I will punish them for their sin." And the Lord struck the people with a plague because of what they did with the calf Aaron made. Did anything jump out at you?
Yeah.
Let me show you what God showed me and what jumped off the page at me. John, would you please put up the first slide? In 24, we're going to talk about the genuine and the counterfeit. In 24, you see what Moses did in chapter 24. But in chapter 32, you see what Aaron did. In chapter 24, Moses builds an altar at the foot of the mountain. And he built an altar to God. But when we get to 32, Aaron is trying to duplicate what Moses did. And Aaron builds an altar in front of an idol. In 24, Moses offers burnt offerings and fellowship offerings. So Aaron has seen him do this a number of times. So he sacrifices burnt offerings and fellowship offerings. In chapter 24, they ate, they drank in the presence of God. But in chapter 32, they just ate and they drank. God's presence wasn't part of that. In chapter 24, it leads to the cleansing of the people. Let me just show you something here. Early the next morning, this is verse 4 or 5, 4. Early the next morning, Moses gets up and he builds an altar at the foot of the mountain, and he sets up the 12 stone pillars. Then he sends the men to do the offerings to the Lord, and he takes the blood and he puts it in bowls, and he sprinkles half of it on the altar. And what he does with the other half is he sprinkles it on the people. So it comes to this fruition of cleansing the people. But in 32, Aaron's whole deal, the counterfeit, it leads to just indulgence and revelry. The people are out of control, and Moses can see, in chapter 32 we read, Moses sees that Aaron let the people get out of control. In chapter 24, we hear that it's a wonderful little spark right in there. It says that the people were right face to face with God. It was the 70 elders and Aaron and Abihu and Nadab and Moses. They're all face to face with God. And it says in verse 11, "But God did not raise his hand against the leaders of the Israelites. They saw God and they ate and they drank." They were right in his presence. And he wasn't angry at them because they'd already been cleansed by the blood, because that's what Moses had brought forth, you see. But here, in chapter 32, with what Aaron does, God gets angry. And he's ready to destroy the entire nation. Start over with Moses. What Moses did was genuine. But what Aaron did was counterfeit. Aaron had seen Moses perform the worship ceremony many, many times. And Aaron does everything that Moses did, but the outcome's totally different. Because Aaron had mixed what was holy with what was pagan. They substituted an idol for their real relationship with God. They had turned away from God, and God himself says so in chapter 32 when he talks to Moses and says, go down there and deal with the people. They've turned away from me. Very interesting point. Moses is only gone for a month and 10 days. And the people suddenly turn away from the Lord. I don't think that if Caroline's gone for 2 weeks that you and I are going to turn away from God. No. But it just goes to show how much of the culture from where they were in Egypt still came with them, and how much was still influencing their thoughts, their actions, and what they wanted out of life. Let me show you point 2. This is what we also see in the comparison of these 2 chapters. This is the next slide, John. Mm-hmm. Okay. Moses stands in the position of a high priest. Jesus is our high priest. This is what a foreshadowing is called. Okay, it's called foreshadowing when you see the image of Jesus within the scriptures, but it's not Jesus who's doing it. It's putting you forward to what Jesus is going to do for you, as far as this goes, because this is Old Testament, so they're looking forward to what Jesus is going to do. But we can look back on it and say that's what Jesus has already done. Okay? So in the foreshadowing, you see that Moses is in the position of the high priest. Jesus is our high priest. Moses takes half the blood and he sprinkles it on the altar, which satisfies God's requirement. He takes the other half and he sprinkles it on the people, which cleanses them. Jesus has one sacrifice, does his one sacrifice, and it satisfies both God and the need for the cleansing of people, and it's permanent. The people end up with fellowship with God, and God accepts them as his people. With Jesus, we gain fellowship with God, and the acceptance is permanent. Never will God raise his hand against you and I, and never will God threaten to wipe us out. He could threaten that in the Old Testament because the sacrifice was not a permanent thing. It wasn't a permanent cleansing of the people. It was always a temporary thing in the Old Testament. Now we have a permanent thing. In chapter 24, verses 1 and 2, I want to show it to you. It's right there. Come up to the Lord, you and Aaron, Nadab and Abihu, the 70 elders of Israel. You are to worship at a distance, but Moses alone is to approach. The high priest was the only one who could go into the sanctuary, into the Holy of Holies. The others must not come near, so they kind of stay at a distance, which would be representative of the priesthood, like you and I become priesthood because of Jesus Christ. They're servants of God. They're servants within the temple, within the tabernacle. Okay? And then the final step is the people may not come near. So you see, Moses is closest to God, then there is the priesthood, and then there is the people. That's the way the Old Testament was set up. And that whole statement right there in the chapter 24 is a precursor to all that's going to come in chapters 25 to 31 when God declares what's going to happen in the tabernacle, the building of the tabernacle, all the pieces of the tabernacle, what they're used for and how they're to be used, how they're to be cleansed, what they do for the people, what they do for him, all that kind of stuff. So that's a precursor to all of that. But that shows you what Jesus Christ is doing for you. You can see all of that in Hebrews, and I can't take the time today to show you all that. The second thing is in verses 6 to 8, and that's where the blood is sprinkled on the altar and satisfies God. That's all in verses 6 to 8 of chapter 24. And then in verse 11 is that one little nugget, and I haven't been able to get past that all week while I've been studying stuff. But God did not raise his hand against the elders of the Israelites. They saw God, and they ate, and they drank. What does that put you in mind of? Any scholars out there?
The wedding feast.
The wedding feast. The end of all things, when you and I are before God at the wedding feast, Jesus is the bridegroom, and you and I, as the body of Christ, we are the bride. Isn't that cool? These are the things that excite me when you see these things come up off the page like that. Jesus has given us permanent access to God. He has permanently cleansed us. We can be in the very presence of God. We can eat, we can drink, we can fellowship with God. It's exciting. He accepts us because of what Jesus Christ did. Let me show you something else. Chapter 32. I don't know if I did this one on a slide or not, John. The intercessor. Did I do that? No. Okay. Back up. Good. Good. Okay. In chapter 32, verses 9 to 14, you see Moses as an intercessor. Let me get there because I want to read that stuff. I've seen these people, he says to the Lord, and they are a stiff-necked people. Oh no, that's God speaking. Oh yeah. God says, I've seen these people, they're stiff-necked people. Stiff-necked just means stubborn. Don't want to move, don't want to change. That's what God was saying. Now leave me alone so my anger can burn against them, and I will destroy them, and I'll take you and make a great nation. And then Moses steps in, seeks the favor of God, and he says, why should your anger burn against your people who you brought out of Egypt with great power and with a mighty hand? And why should the Egyptians be given the opportunity to say that the only reason you brought them out was so that you could wipe them out? You see? He goes before them. He intercedes with God for them. Jesus Christ sits at the right hand of the Father right now, interceding for you and interceding for me. When we are out of line, Jesus Christ steps in and says, that's my child. Now, I know they're not behaving the right way right now, but, it is part of your reputation, Father, how things happen with them. Can we not just simply correct them? That's what Jesus does for you and I all the time. So we see Moses as an intercessor. His attitude is humble. He acknowledges who God is, that it is God's work at God's own hand. It is God's power and God's might. Jesus always acknowledged his Father, didn't he? He said things like this, not my will, but thy will be done, so that these people may know that you and I are one. I come to do the works of my Father. Those are things Jesus Christ said. So you see, Moses is what's called a foreshadow of Jesus in these chapters. But here's the comparison. I thought I did another slide. There should be a second. There should be like 3 slides.
4.
What's the next one? There, that's the one I want. The comparison between Moses and Aaron is in chapter 32, verses 9 to 14, and then Aaron's part you'll see in 21 to 25. Moses says, why should your anger burn against these people? Why should you wipe them out? Why should Israel be looked at as a laughingstock? Why should the Egyptians be able to say that you brought them out to wipe them out? And he says to God, please turn from your anger, relent, and don't bring this disaster upon your people. So Moses defends God's reputation. But when Moses goes to Aaron and says, what did these people do to you to make you lead them into this great sin? Down in verse 21, Aaron totally reacts in self-preservation. His words. Do not be angry at me, Aaron says. You know these people are prone to do evil. They said to me, make us gods, and I did. Paraphrasing. Moses acknowledges God and his mighty hand and all of his mighty works. Aaron casts blame on all the people. Moses reminds God of his promise through Abraham. There's a key there. And Aaron doesn't take any responsibility for anything. And Moses will not take blessing or promise that's not intended for him. He will not receive any glory. That's the humility That's why he reminds God, no. Making the great nation, that came through Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. That is not my promise. You gave that to them. And he won't take it. And he reminds God of it because he says to God, you can't give that to me. You promised that to somebody else. Aaron has absolutely no respect for God's reputation, nor does he have any respect for his leadership or for the people themselves. Now, interesting little tidbit you may not know, Aaron is Moses' younger brother. So this is a bit of a family squabble as well. And I can envision Moses just grabbing Aaron by the scruff of the neck going, "What did you do?" But anyway, there is a reason that what Moses did was acceptable to God and what Aaron did was not. And it's not just the idol worship. Moses has intimacy with God, and Aaron does not. And that is the big point. Jesus Christ has died so that you and I can have intimacy with God. That's what the point was. And a lot of times we don't take advantage of that because we're too stuck in what we got going on. We're too stuck in our religious statements. We're too stuck in our religious activities. We're too stuck in the program. And we don't let God just simply move on us. And when he does move on us, we don't know what to do with that. So then we either might sit there stiff-necked and rebellious and not respond, or maybe, if you're like me, I get overwhelmed. You've seen me. I could be in worship and poor John, he's up here and he's playing guitar and he's trying to sing, and I'm not supporting him because I do the step back. Have you noticed that? I physically step back because I'm overwhelmed and I'm all choked up. I've got no voice to sing with. God has overwhelmed me. That's what happens to me. And once I'm back under enough control to where I can croak a little bit, I'll step back in to the position of worship leader. But when I step out, I'm stepping out of the position of worship leader because I'm also a human being, and I'm like you, I can be overwhelmed by God. Some people, when they're overwhelmed by God, they raise their hands. Some people clap. Some people praise, and they speak out loud. Some people go into a prayer tongue. Other people, they can be totally overwhelmed by God, and there's nothing you can see on the outside of them to tell you that they're overwhelmed by God. But they can still be overwhelmed by God at that moment because it's between them and God. And you and I can't say, well, you got to be like her, or you got to be like him, or you got to do it this way, you got to do it that way. We can't. Because God wants an intimate relationship. And how many of you out there know an intimate relationship between you and God is going to look different between you and God than it looks between me and God? Because I am not you. And you are not me. So can I just release you? Nobody's looking at you weird if you want to put your hands in the air. And nobody's looking at you weird if you don't. So just be released in that. But if you want to clap, clap. Regardless of whether anybody else around you is clapping. Tonight there was some people who wanted to clap, but they kind of got shied away from clapping. Clap. It is a response to God. And that's exactly why we're here. This is the time we set aside to worship him. That's where our focus needs to be. And if he's touching your heart and it makes you want to dance like Caroline does sometimes while she's up here, then do that. Just stand up, maybe, get yourself in the back where you're not going to trip somebody or whatever. I got to tell you, when we were in Maine, we lived in Maine, there were many days that I went to the back of the sanctuary because I couldn't sit still. I couldn't. Now, you've never seen me do what I do. Not only am I a speaker, I'm an intercessor. But my intercessing, there are people who intercede in prayer, okay? My intercessory, there are people who speak in tongues. And that's another one. I'm going to put all these little balls in the air, and then I'm going to put them all together so you can see and understand. There are people who speak in tongues. I don't speak in tongues. There are people who intercede through prayer. I don't intercede through prayer. I mean, I do pray for people, but it's not like people who are true intercessors. There's a very different thing there. I do physical manifestation, and my intercessory part is warfare. And it's physically demonstrative. If you had seen me in our home church in Maine, you would have seen me in the back of the room doing this. I want to make sure everybody can see this. It's not because I just want you to understand. But there would be times when I would be rocking and I would be doing just this the entire time. This is part of it. Okay? And I couldn't stop. That's why I'd get up. I'm going to lose my rings. That's why I'd get up out of my chair and I'd go to the back of the room. Because sometimes I'm doing this the entire time. Do you know what this is? No. This is warfare. This is chopping at the root of the problem. Hacking at the root of the problem. That's what this is. And I would stand there the entire service. And services there could go on for 2 hours. And I'd be back there for 2 hours doing this. Or doing this, which is make the way straight, make the way straight, make the way straight, make the way straight. It's my demonstrations and my intercession is so physically demonstrative because I don't want to be seen. I don't like having attention put on me. I don't want to be up in front of you. But God said, it's not about you. It's about me. Yes. You need, I could speak in tongues probably and not have an issue with it. He didn't need to get control of my tongue. He needed to get control of my pride. He needed to get control of my fear of pleasing people, my need to please people. He needed to get control of my fear of being embarrassed. You can't stand in front of a room of 750 people and do this for 2 hours and not feel a little embarrassed sometimes. You can't stand in the back of the room for 2 hours just doing this or doing, which is Holy Spirit blow across people. So my intercession is for the body of God, it's body of Christ, and it has definite purpose, definite points. It's not just weird, wacky stuff that I'm doing in the back of the room. It has a point behind it. And he had to reveal to me what each of those things were and why he needed me to do them. Well, I needed to get to the point where I was willing to do them whether people looked at me funny or not. And there was one time when I was in the back of the room that I was distracting the pastor. And once I saw that, I just dropped to my knees and I said, God, I can't be doing this to distract him. And God said, no, you need to stand up. He needs to see you doing it because he needs to know what you're warring against. The attack is on him. He needs to see you in warfare for him. And it only took Pastor Jeff, who taught me all of these things, 30 seconds. I don't think we connected eyes, but I think he saw me in the back of the room and thought in his normal human brain, what the heck is she doing back there? And then within seconds, the Holy Spirit said, she's warring for you. And then he went into one of the greatest sermons he's ever preached, and the people were moved. Because something was hindering. Mike opened everything up by saying, when you get an unction from the Lord, you have to follow through. Regardless of whether it makes you look weird. You've got to get over your embarrassment. You've got to get over feeling like everybody's looking at you and everybody's casting a judgment on you, because they're not. And if they are, shame on them.
Right. Amen.
All of that was a freebie. It was a side note.
That was awesome, Roxann.
Aaron did not have intimacy with God. Aaron was simply religious. That's all it was. He was with all the right people, doing all the right stuff, hanging out with the right people. Just, but it didn't mean anything. And he said, we're going to have this festival for the Lord. Well, it wasn't for the Lord. And God wasn't angry at Aaron because he performed some sacrifices, built an altar. It wasn't that. It's that he did it to an idol and claimed that it was for God. That's what made God mad. You have intimacy with God. Don't let anybody rob you of that.
Amen.
Amen.
The end of chapter 32, I didn't understand that for a long, long time. And I said, God, why did you have Moses go through the camp, or have the Levites go through the camp and kill all those people?
Yeah.
Well, cleansing has to happen. And I wonder, I don't have an answer to this, I have speculation. I wonder, why was the number 3,000 and who were those people? And John and I, just in speculation back and forth, thought maybe it was the leadership that didn't stand up against what Aaron was doing and didn't speak up because they knew better. Perhaps it was the people who initiated it. Maybe it was the people who really pressured Aaron into doing this. Because you and I both know, you can be at work and you can work with people for a little while or do any kind of activity with people for a little while, and you get a sense of who's, going to be good at something or not good at something, who you want telling tales and who you don't want telling tales and all that kind of stuff. You get to know. I think Moses knew. He'd been with these people already for a pretty long time, and I think he knew exactly who those people were that stirred all that up and pushed on Aaron and pressured Aaron into doing that. So, I think he instructed them because he cleansed God's people. Again, Moses is the intercessor, the go-between. The Levites, I think it's interesting, the Levites were the only ones who stood with Moses. Levites are the temple workers. They're the servants of God. They have a true heart, servant for God. I think that if I could trace my roots back to Abraham, that I would find that I probably am of the tribe of Levi. And if I could claim a tribe, I would claim that tribe as my own. Servant of God. They carried out a very difficult task. Intimacy with God will bring you sometimes to where you have to do things that are not easy. Sometimes you have to make the choice, are you going to serve God or are you going to please people? Now, I had to face that choice. That's why I'm here at this body. That choice for me was probably 4 or 5 years ago now. And standing in my kitchen, I was dealing with a particular issue, and I couldn't figure out what this pressure was that was on my head and my shoulders. But I just knew it wasn't right. That's all I could say is, it's just not right. It's not right. It's not right. I couldn't put my finger on what was not right, but I knew it wasn't right. And then God said to me, do you want to give up the intimacy that you've got with me to go back to religion? And I immediately said, no. I don't want the counterfeit. I want the real. And he said, okay. Nothing happened for another year. But at least I then understood what I was warring against, what the pressure was. And so then I knew the right steps to take. God, I won't move until you tell me to move. And then came the day when it all rose up out of me, and God and I talked over each other. It's kind of an interesting moment, but God and I talked over each other. We said the same thing. You're done. You can move on, which was really quite nice. So that was the day of freedom, and that's what brought me into this body from where I was.
Amen.
Yeah. Intimacy with God sometimes makes you face and deal with very difficult things. But you're supposed to. And he is kind, and he goes through those things with you. He doesn't send you into it and then stand back and say, okay, I'm going to wait and see how you handle it. He goes with you when he asks you to do a difficult thing. He went with Moses. He had people. Moses had people. He had the Levites. He had people around him while he had to do this stuff. But it was the intimacy that he experienced in chapter 24, where he was called into the cloud. That intimacy prepared Moses for what he had to do in chapter 32. Sometimes God's going to ask you to go aside and just be intimate with him, and he's going to give you no inclination as to why you need this big, huge draw of privacy with him. But sometimes that's because he's setting you up to be ready for the thing that's coming down the road. Remember, he can see the end from the beginning. He can see what your tomorrow has, where you don't know. And so he's preparing you so that when you do face that thing, you're ready. God always prepares you. He doesn't want you to come into something and be totally blown away and not know how to handle it. He wants you prepared before you get there. So if you sense God pulling on you to get alone and get quiet with him and spend more time with him, do it. He's preparing you for something. Moses and the Levites were not people pleasers. They were God pleasers. And they had to do the difficult stuff. Intimacy will always cause you to choose God first. Choose God above all else, just like brother, son, neighbor, and choose God no matter what. The Levites were blessed by God because they chose to follow through with his instructions. They chose to stand with Moses, who was practicing the genuine. They chose to do the difficult thing. And God blessed them for it. Intimacy will always cause you to make hard choices. But when you choose God's will, the blessings come to you. And you won't know what those blessings will be until after the fact. Moses is very blunt with his people. He tells them the truth, and then he goes before them to God, and God relents. Intimacy is when you're honest with one another, isn't it? You can't be honest with somebody you don't trust. And if you don't trust God enough to be intimate with God, then there's where you got to start. What do I do now? How do I go forward? Ask that question, and God will show you. Can you go to the last slide? You and I have forgiveness. Jesus has purchased it for us. There was forgiveness for the people. God granted them forgiveness, but he did not remove the consequence of their choice. They chose the idol. They chose the idol worship. And they faced drinking a heavy metal. Gold is not meant to be put inside the human body. It most likely was poisonous to them. They were wiped out by the sword, and later on, there was a plague. The consequence will always remain. You have God's forgiveness, but you've made a choice. The consequence is still there. You still have to go through the consequence. You have to live with that. But God will walk through those consequences with you to bring you out on the other side to the positive and good place. That's his point. That's why he goes with you. Today is Mother's Day. And I had a very hard time wanting to speak today. Not because because I have issues with my mother, but because it's a personal feeling. Mother's Day is a man-made holiday. It is not a God holiday. God didn't institute it. God said honor your father and your mother. He means do that every day. Every day. And I knew I was not going to get up here and speak about mothers. And I had a very frank conversation with Caroline, and I said, people are going to expect me to speak about mothers on Mother's Day, and I can't do it. I cannot just go forward and please people. And she said, it'll be fine. It'll be fine. You just say whatever God's got on your heart, and it'll be fine. I don't want to offend people, and I don't want to hurt people. But I want to be genuine. This is the 2 hours out of my whole week where I gather with other believers. And we gather to worship God. Amen. I don't want to bring the calf into the holy and claim it's for God. I want this to be just His. Only His. If I personally cannot give Him this 2 hours out of my entire week, shame on me. Some of you go to church in the morning service and you go to church in the evening service, both on a Sunday. So you're giving God more than just 2 hours. And that's applaudable. It is. Your daily time with Him. That's where the intimacy grows. The daily time with Him. Take the time. Put Him first. Make it a conscious choice. I'm going to choose God today. And I'm going to take 10 minutes, 5 minutes, whatever you can do, whatever He's laid on your heart to do. And I'm going to give Him genuine worship today, because He is my God. He is worthy of my worship, and He does not share His glory with anything or anyone else.
Amen.
And I will not contaminate it like the people were corrupted. I won't contaminate it with the things of this world. I don't mean disrespect to motherhood. I am a mother. I don't mean disrespect to Mother's Day. But I don't think we need to have that in our church services. That's my personal opinion. You don't have to agree with me. And it's going to be okay if you don't. So here's my challenge to you. Who are you? Are you Moses? Or are you Aaron? Are you a people pleaser? Or are you a God pleaser? Are you more concerned with what God thinks or what people are going to say? Are you an intimate worshiper or just a religious person? Are you genuine or are you counterfeit? Who are you? That's a question only you can answer. I want to be Moses. I'm done.